If you've been following Edgar Cayce narratives, you've probably noticed that some things don't really leave you, even when you decide to walk away from them and build a completely different direction for your life. There are moments when you think you've moved on for good, and everything feels settled on the surface. But something small can suddenly bring back a connection you didn't expect to feel again. You might hear a piece of music, see someone doing something you once did, or come across a situation that feels strangely familiar in a way that is hard to explain clearly. The reaction is immediate, and it doesn't feel like a distant memory, because it feels active, present, and somehow still part of who you are right now. So in this video, I want to explore one simple idea with you. What if the talent you walked away from never actually left you? It can happen in a very ordinary moment, when you are not thinking about the past and not trying to remember anything important. And that is exactly why it catches you off guard. You might be walking through a store, sitting in a quiet space, or just scrolling without paying much attention. And then a sound or image appears that feels familiar in a way that is hard to ignore. You hear a piece of music, and your body reacts before your mind has time to process what is happening. Your attention sharpens, your breathing shifts slightly, and something inside you feels active again, almost like it has been waiting for this exact moment to come back to the surface. You are not trying to remember anything, but the response is immediate and clear. And what stands out is that it does not feel like nostalgia. It does not feel like you are looking back at something that is gone. It feels present, like something that still belongs to you right now, even if you have not touched it or practiced it in years. The connection feels intact, not faded, and that creates a quiet sense of confusion. You might notice that you can still follow the structure of what you are hearing or seeing without effort. If it is music, you understand the rhythm and flow without needing to think about it step by step. If it is a skill you once had, your mind moves through it naturally, as if the pathway is still there and still accessible. It feels less like recalling something old and more like stepping back into something that never fully closed. At the same time, another part of you steps in and reminds you that you left this behind. You made a decision, or life pushed you in a different direction, and you accepted that this part of your life was no longer active. You built something else, focused on what made sense, and told yourself that this was just something from another time. But the moment does not fully go away. Even after the sound stops or the situation changes, something stays with you. There is a lingering awareness that the connection is still there, quiet but stable, and it raises a question that is difficult to ignore once it appears. If this was truly something you left behind, why does it still feel so natural, so immediate, and so close to who you are right now? If you go back far enough, you can usually find where this connection started, and in many cases, it did not feel forced or difficult in the beginning. It showed up early, sometimes in childhood or during a period when you were still exploring what felt natural to you. And it stood out because it did not require the same level of effort as other things. You did not have to push yourself to stay engaged, and you did not need constant motivation because the interest was already there. There was often a sense of ease in how you approached it, even if you were not fully aware of it at the time. You might have picked things up faster than expected, understood patterns without needing detailed explanations, or felt comfortable doing something that others found challenging. It did not always mean you were perfect at it, but there was a clear signal that this was something you could grow into without forcing yourself to become someone else. As time went on, the connection became stronger through repetition and experience, and it started to form a part of how you saw yourself. This was not just something you did occasionally, because it began to shape your identity in a quiet but consistent way. You might have imagined a future around it, or at least recognized that this ability or interest could play a meaningful role in your life if you chose to follow it further. But at some point, something changed, and the direction shifted in a way that felt necessary at the time. In some cases, it was pressure from outside, where expectations from family, school, or environment pushed you towards something more stable or more accepted. In other cases, it was a practical decision, where you chose a path that seemed safer, more predictable, or easier to justify in the long term. There are also moments where fear plays a role, even if it is not obvious at first. The idea of fully committing to something you care about can bring uncertainty, because it exposes you to failure, judgment, or the possibility that things may not work out the way you hope. Walking away can feel like a way to regain control, even if it means leaving something meaningful behind. So the decision is made, either gradually or all at once, and life begins to reorganize around a different focus. You invest your time and energy into new responsibilities, new goals, and new routines, and over time, this new direction becomes your normal. The old skill or passion is no longer part of your daily life, and you stop engaging with it in any active way. At first, the distance feels real, and it seems like a clean break has been made. Days turn into months, and months turn into years, and you rarely think about that part of your life unless something specific brings it back into your awareness. From the outside, it looks like a complete transition, and even from your own perspective, it can feel like something that belongs to a different version of yourself. But when moments like the one we described earlier happen, they reveal something important that does not match the idea of a full separation. The connection does not behave like something that has faded away through time. Instead, it responds quickly, almost as if it has been inactive rather than lost. And that difference becomes harder to ignore the more you notice it. You begin to see that this is not just a single, isolated experience, because similar moments can happen again in different situations. Each time, the response feels consistent, and each time, it brings back the same sense that the ability or connection is still available to you in a way that does not align with how long it has been since you last used it. And that is where the pattern starts to become clear, because this is no longer just about the past. And it is not just about memory. There is a repeated structure here where something that was once active, then set aside, continues to show signs of being present whenever the right trigger appears. At that point, it becomes difficult to explain this as something that simply disappeared over time, because everything about the response suggests that it did not actually go anywhere. As time moves forward, your life continues to build around the choices you made, and the direction you chose starts to feel stable, practical, and easier to explain to other people. You develop routines, responsibilities, and goals that take up your attention, and this new structure becomes the version of your life that feels real on a daily basis. The past does not disappear, but it becomes less visible, and it no longer plays an active role in how you move through your days. From the outside, everything makes sense, because your current path reflects the decisions you made for clear reasons, and those reasons still seem valid when you look at them logically. You chose something that felt safer, more predictable, or more aligned with what was expected of you. And over time, that choice becomes part of how you define yourself in the present. But underneath that structure, something does not fully settle, and it shows up in small, quiet ways that are easy to ignore at first, but become harder to dismiss the more they repeat. You notice that certain triggers still create a strong internal response, and that response feels immediate, not distant, and not filtered through time. It does not behave like something that belongs only to the past. What makes this more confusing is that the ability itself still feels accessible, even after a long period of not using it. You might find that you can step back into it faster than expected, or that your understanding of it has not disappeared in the way you assumed it would. The connection feels intact, and that creates a gap between what you believe should be true and what you are actually experiencing. On one side, you have the clear fact that you left this behind, and that decision has shaped your life in real and visible ways. On the other side, you have a persistent sense that this part of you is still present, still available, and still connected to how you experience certain moments. These two realities exist at the same time, and they do not fully align with each other. This creates a form of internal tension that is not dramatic but steady, because it keeps returning in different situations and asking the same underlying question. If something has truly been left behind, it should fade, weaken, or become difficult to access. But that is not what is happening here. Instead, it feels close, responsive, and ready to return with very little effort. You may try to explain it in simple terms, telling yourself that it is just memory or familiarity, and that the feeling will eventually pass if you do not pay attention to it. But each time it comes back, it brings the same level of clarity, and it does not feel like something that is slowly disappearing. It feels stable, almost unchanged, even after long periods of distance. At a certain point, the question becomes harder to avoid, because it is no longer just about a moment or a memory, and it is not just about curiosity. It becomes a direct contradiction that sits quietly in the background of your experience. You left it behind, and that part is clear, but it did not leave you. And that part is just as clear once you start paying attention. So the question begins to take a more defined shape, and it stays with you longer each time it appears. Why does this still feel like part of who I am, even after everything I have done to move in a different direction? At this point, the usual explanations start to feel incomplete, because they can describe parts of the experience but not the full pattern that keeps repeating over time. You can explain familiarity, practice, and memory, but those explanations do not fully account for why something can remain so responsive after long periods of complete disconnection. This is where a different perspective becomes useful, not as something you have to believe, but as a way to look at the same experience from another angle. In the work associated with Edgar Cayce, there is a recurring idea that some abilities do not begin in the current lifetime, but are instead developed over a longer arc of experience that continues across different periods of life. In this view, what you recognize as talent or natural inclination may not be something you started from zero, but something you are continuing from an earlier stage that is not immediately visible to you now. When you look at the situation through this lens, the pattern starts to make more sense in a very direct way. The ability feels accessible because it was not built only within the time frame you remember, and the connection feels intact because it was not created recently. What you are experiencing is not the return of something lost, but the resurfacing of something that was already established at a deeper level. This changes how you interpret the decision to walk away, because leaving something behind no longer means that it disappears completely. It means that your attention moves away from it. Your daily engagement stops, and your life reorganizes around something else. But the underlying structure that supports that ability may still remain in place. The pathway is no longer active, but it is not erased. In this context, suppression and disappearance are not the same thing, even though they can look similar from the outside. Suppression means that something is no longer expressed or used in your daily life, while disappearance would mean that it no longer exists in any meaningful way. The experience you are having suggests suppression, because the response is still there whenever the right condition appears. This perspective also explains why the reconnection can feel immediate rather than gradual, because you are not starting from the beginning again. You are stepping back into something that already has structure, familiarity, and depth, even if you have not interacted with it for a long time. The sense of recognition comes from that continuity, not from recent exposure or repeated practice. At the same time, this idea does not require you to reject psychological explanations or practical factors, because those still play a role in how abilities are expressed and maintained in daily life. What it does is expand the frame, allowing for the possibility that what you are experiencing is not fully contained within a single period of time or a single set of conditions. So instead of asking why something from the past still feels present, the question begins to shift in a more precise direction. If this ability was never entirely created in this phase of your life, then walking away from it would not be enough to remove it completely. It would simply change how often you interact with it and how visible it is in your daily experience. From that point of view, the contradiction you have been feeling is no longer a problem that needs to be resolved, but a signal that something has been misunderstood in how you interpret your own experience. You thought you left something behind, but what you actually did was step away from something that continues to exist, even without your active involvement. And once you consider that possibility, the original question becomes sharper and more specific. If the ability never fully disappeared, and if the connection is still active beneath the surface, then what you are feeling now is not a leftover from the past, but an indication that the connection is still part of you in the present. Once you start looking beyond your own experience, you begin to notice that this pattern shows up in many different forms across different people, and it follows a structure that is difficult to dismiss as coincidence. There are individuals who step away from a skill for years, sometimes even decades, and when they return to it, the rebuilding process happens much faster than expected, as if they are reconnecting rather than starting over. You can see this clearly in cases where someone returns to music, drawing, language, or physical movement after a long break. And instead of struggling through the basics again, they quickly regain a level of fluency that feels out of proportion with the time they spent away. The body responds, the mind adapts, and the sense of familiarity returns with a speed that suggests continuity rather than loss. There are also situations where people feel a strong pull toward a specific ability, even when they are not actively practicing it or building their life around it. The interest does not disappear completely, and it does not behave like a temporary curiosity that fades with time. Instead, it remains present in the background, waiting for the right moment to surface again, often triggered by something small and unexpected. In some cases, this pattern appears in people who were identified as having unusual ability at a young age, but later moved away from it due to pressure, environment, or personal decisions. Years later, when they reconnect, they often find that the foundation is still there, and that what they thought had been lost is still accessible with far less effort than they anticipated. What makes this more interesting is that the emotional connection tends to remain just as strong as the ability itself, and sometimes even stronger. People often describe a sense of rightness when they return to something they once left behind, as if they are aligning with a part of themselves that was never fully gone. This feeling is not always dramatic, but it is consistent, and it reinforces the idea that the connection did not disappear over time. You can also observe this in how certain abilities seem to stay organized beneath the surface, even when they are not being used actively. When the person re-engages, the structure is still there, and the process of rebuilding does not feel like constructing something new from the beginning. It feels like restoring access to something that was temporarily set aside. At the same time, this pattern does not apply to everything equally, and that difference becomes important when you look at it closely. Some skills fade quickly when they are not used, and some interests disappear completely when attention shifts elsewhere. But others remain stable in a way that stands out clearly when you compare them side by side. That contrast raises a useful question, because it suggests that not all abilities are held in the same way, and not all connections are formed at the same depth. If something can remain accessible and emotionally present after long periods of inactivity, then it may not be functioning in the same category as something that fades quickly with time. This is where the broader pattern starts to support the idea we introduced earlier, because it shows that your experience is not isolated or unusual. It fits into a larger structure that appears across different people, different situations, and different types of ability. And each example points to the same underlying principle. What you leave behind does not always disappear, and in some cases, it remains close enough to return without needing to be rebuilt from the beginning, which suggests that the connection itself was never fully broken in the first place. Up to this point, we have looked at the experience from a broader and more interpretive angle, but there are also clear explanations within modern psychology and neuroscience that help us understand why certain abilities feel like they never fully disappear. These explanations do not cancel out the earlier perspective, but they provide a grounded way to see how the brain and body store and reactivate what has been learned. When you practice a skill over time, your brain builds specific neural pathways that make that skill easier to perform. And these pathways do not simply vanish when you stop using them. They can weaken or become less active, but the structure itself often remains in place, especially if the skill was developed with strong repetition or emotional involvement. This is why returning to something can feel faster than learning it for the first time, because you are reactivating existing connections rather than creating new ones from nothing. There is also the concept of muscle memory, which applies not only to physical movement, but also to patterns of coordination and timing that become embedded through repeated use. Even after long periods of inactivity, the body can respond in familiar ways when reintroduced to the same activity, and this response can feel automatic, as if the body remembers what to do before the mind fully catches up. At the same time, emotional reinforcement plays a major role in how strongly a skill or interest is stored. When something matters to you on a deeper level, the experience is encoded more firmly, and that makes it more resistant to fading over time. This helps explain why certain abilities feel more alive than others, because they are tied not just to practice, but to meaning, identity, and personal significance. There is also a layer of subconscious conditioning that influences how quickly something can return to the surface. Even if you are not actively thinking about a skill, the patterns associated with it can remain active in the background, shaping how you respond when a familiar trigger appears. This is why the reaction can feel immediate, because the system that supports it has not been completely inactive, even if it has not been visible. When you bring all of these elements together, the experience begins to make sense in a practical way. Neural pathways remain. Muscle memory supports rapid reactivation, and emotional significance strengthens retention over time, which creates a situation where something can feel both distant and immediately accessible at the same time. But even with these explanations, there is still a small gap that remains, because not every skill behaves this way, and not every connection feels as stable after long periods of absence. Some abilities fade quickly despite practice, and some interests disappear even when they were once strong, which suggests that there are additional factors influencing why certain connections remain while others do not. So instead of choosing one explanation over the other, it becomes more useful to see how they can exist together, because the psychological perspective explains how the system works, while the earlier perspective raises the question of why certain abilities are reinforced more deeply than others in the first place. When you step back and look at everything together, the repeated experience, the pattern across time, and both the psychological and Cayce perspectives, a clearer idea begins to take shape in a very direct way. Some abilities do not feel like something you learned once and then lost, because they feel like something you step in and out of without ever fully disconnecting from them. This changes how you interpret the feeling of recognition, because it is no longer just about memory or familiarity, and it is not just about skill returning after practice. It feels like continuity, where the connection remains active at a level that does not depend entirely on what you are doing in your daily life. The ability is not always visible, but it is still part of how you are structured internally. That is why returning to it can feel natural instead of difficult, and why the first moments of reconnection often feel more like resuming than restarting. You are not building from the beginning, and you are not trying to recreate something that disappeared. You are reconnecting with something that remained in place, even when your attention moved somewhere else. It also explains why the emotional response is so strong, because the connection is not only technical or skill-based, and it is not only tied to performance or results. It is connected to how you experience yourself, and that is why it feels personal in a way that is hard to ignore or dismiss. The sense of rightness that appears when you engage with it again comes from that alignment, not from external validation. At the same time, this idea brings a more practical understanding of why certain things do not fade like others, because they are not held at the same depth. Some skills exist at the surface level and depend on regular use to stay active, while others are integrated more deeply and remain accessible even when they are not part of your routine. So the insight becomes simple, but it changes how you look at your own experience in a meaningful way. Some abilities feel less like something you learned at a specific point in time, and more like something you are continuing across time, even if that continuation is not always visible. And once you see it this way, the earlier contradiction begins to resolve itself without needing to force an explanation, because you no longer have to choose between the idea that you left it behind and the experience that it is still present. Both can be true at the same time, because leaving something does not necessarily end your connection to it. At this point, it becomes less about explaining the experience and more about recognizing it in your own life, because the pattern we have been exploring is not something abstract, and it usually shows up in very specific and personal ways. You may already know what this is for you, even if you have not put it into words before, because the feeling tends to be clear once you pay attention to it directly. Think about something you once had a strong connection to, something that felt natural, engaging, and easy to return to, even after time passed and your life moved in a different direction. Notice how it responds when you come back into contact with it, and pay attention to whether it feels distant or still present in a way that is hard to ignore. Then ask yourself a simple question and try to answer it honestly without overthinking it or trying to fit it into a specific explanation. If this ability or connection never fully left you, and if it still feels like part of who you are right now, what does that say about your relationship to it? And more importantly, is it something you truly left behind? Or is it something you have simply not returned to yet? If something in this video connected with you, I'd like to hear about it, because this is one of those topics that becomes more meaningful when you look at real experiences, not just ideas. You can share in the comments what talent or ability you feel like you left behind, and whether it still shows up for you in moments like the ones we talked about. If there was a part of this that felt unclear or raised questions for you, write that down as well, because I read through those and often use them to guide what we explore next on Edgar Cayce narratives. And if you want more videos like this, where we break down real patterns in a clear and practical way, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what comes next.